Let's go ahead and get started about this very important topic as part of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Let's start though with Alissa. Tell us a little bit about what you do for Victim Services.
So what I do for Victim Services, I am a sexual assault counselor. I see mostly adults and provide counseling for adults, some children as well. Other things that I do, I am working with 2 of our correctional facilities in our 6-county service area to provide counseling services for persons in custody who've been sexually abused as children or who have been sexually assaulted while in prison. I also work with various churches and faith groups, teaching faith leaders how to respond to and provide services to victims of sexual assault in the faith community.
All right. And on average, I know it changes all the time, but on average, how many people would you say that you counsel for sexual assault?
So I have approximately 30 clients. I don't see all of them every week. I have about 15 to 16 clients that I do counseling with every week. And then I have some clients that I do counseling with maybe once a month, or some that just check in every now and then to let me know what's going on so that I can provide them services in the system with whatever's going on at the time.
Okay, great. And so now that kind of leads us into our main topic for today. Why do many sexual assault survivors not report abuse? And this is a very complicated question to answer.
It is somewhat of a complicated question, but there are multiple reasons. The number one reason is fear of being believed. No one's going to believe me. The fear of the stigma in the community or in their families. There are cultural reasons why people don't report based on their family history, what they've been taught. Some people don't know how to reach out and get help. And unbelievably also there are clients or victims who don't necessarily know that it was sexual assault, meaning, well, I'm married, so therefore I have to do this, or I'm in a relationship, so I have to do this. Embarrassment, fear of the justice system. Unfortunately, we do have some systemic oppression in this country, and so we have victims who unfortunately, based on their race, their ethnicity, have not always been treated fairly or very well. So they have additional burdens. Fear of the police, fear of the criminal justice system, blame, I was drinking, or, and unfortunately those are beliefs. And when it comes to people not knowing how to report, fortunately in Illinois, we have some laws that are pretty good when it comes to sexual assault. So victims will say, well, I don't want to notify the police. Well, in Illinois, many people don't know, you do not have to notify the police. You can go to the hospital, have a forensic exam done, and you can do it anonymously so the police never have to be notified. Okay. So those are some various reasons. There are, a lot, there are many more, but those are some of the main reasons why people don't report sexual abuse or sexual assault.
Yeah, I heard some statistics that it's like only 1 in 3 survivors report.
Yeah. There was every year, there are statistics about how many people, and of course, the answers are always a couple of years behind. In 2018, according to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, only 25% of sexual assaults were ever reported that year. So 25%, and when you have 1 in 3 who are assaulted over a lifetime, it's so minuscule the amount of people that report. And then if they do report, unfortunately, many times it doesn't necessarily go through the legal system, so that even decreases the reporting even more.
Yeah, so I think that's why it's so important that we're talking about this today, and we thank you all for who are watching this presentation with us. And so to kind of expand on that, are barriers to reporting different for children? Do they have additional barriers?
Children have a lot of additional barriers. Some of them are the same. But with children, one of the first barriers is they don't know how to say what happened. They don't know how to report it. They don't have the words to report it. So that limits them. Children also fear that if it's a family member, that if they report it, it will break up the family. Children are also often threatened by the abuser, that if you report this, I'm going to hurt your mom, I'm going to hurt your dad, I'm going to hurt your pets, or I'm going to take stuff away. So they have that fear in there as well, and also the fear that they won't be believed. Or some children don't, goes along with not knowing how to describe it. Some children also don't know what it is, because it may start at a very young age, and unfortunately they may just think it's normal. It's not. It is, it's a violation of the child. And another thing that makes it hard for children to report is recently it's been said that it takes a child telling 7 people that they were sexually abused before someone will finally believe them, because they're a child. And we have ageism where we think that children don't have bodily autonomy, or we don't teach them that they have bodily autonomy, and we teach them, well, they're just a child. Well, and we don't always listen to what children say. So yeah, those are definitely some increased barriers that they have as well.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking to hear, especially with the having to tell 7 adults that this horrible thing happened to them. And yeah, so that's why at Victim Services, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and our theme for this year was Start by Believing. And so this is why it is so critical, if a child or an adult tells you that they've been abused, that you should start by believing that person and then follow the other steps, which we'll get to later on in the presentation. So the other question I have for you, when people mention sexual assault, I think people tend to picture it happening to someone who is a female.
Correct.
But in reality, it can happen to anybody.
Right.
And there's a stigma that I think is associated with, especially it happening to males.
Yeah. So anybody can be the victim of sexual assault. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with identity or orientation, age. It can happen to anybody. My youngest client is 11 years old. My oldest client is 66 years old. And I have male clients. I have female clients. I have clients who are transgender, all across the spectrum. It does. It can happen to anybody. And yeah, especially men, the stigma is worse for them. They face the same barriers that women, victims and survivors experience, but they do have added barriers based on societal views and societal mores. A man, one of their barriers is, I'm a man, nobody's going to believe me. I'm a man, I'm supposed to be strong, and I should be able to fight off an attacker. So they've got to have some added embarrassment, some added shame, even though it's not theirs. Another barrier that men face is some men are afraid that they will be perceived as gay. So yeah, they definitely have added pressures. And then they question their manliness. Why couldn't I fight back? Why couldn't I stop this from happening? So that definitely limits them. And we have had in the past where maybe legal agencies, law enforcement have said, well, you're a man. Men can't be sexually assaulted. When in fact, yes, they can, and they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we're hoping that by talking about this openly, more people will come forward and get the help that they need. And of course, kind of lightly touching on what you mentioned, I'm sure members of the LGBTQ plus community also face additional barriers on top of that.
They definitely have additional barriers. One of those is the fear of being outed. There are members of the LGBTQ community who aren't ready, or they're not sure within themselves yet. And they're afraid of being outed. They're afraid of people finding out. So that is an additional burden. Also, they are sometimes less likely to be believed in society. Well, if you hadn't have done this, or if you hadn't have done that, then this wouldn't have happened to you. There's also the fear that if it's someone within the community, they fear that it'll give the LGBTQ community a bad name, or someone will say, see, And unfortunately, those definitely add to persons reporting. And also the fear or the belief that there's nobody out there to help them. So at WRC Victim Services, we are inclusive, and there have been services in the past in some places that may not have been. So people may think, well, but you don't have the services for me. So, yeah.
Yeah. At Victim Services, we want to help any survivor, no matter who you are, your background, gender identity, sexual orientation. We want this to be, whenever you go to meet your counselor, it is a safe space and a place where we hope you feel comfortable, and that we will give you the services that you need in your specific situation, because everybody's different.
Yeah.
Right. I guess moving on to the way that culture is, which kind of impacts the things
Right.
you've all mentioned. Rape culture gets mentioned a lot, and I feel like people don't fully understand what that is. So can you explain that for us?
So rape culture is an environment in which sexual assault is prevalent and sexual violence against women is prevalent. Now, we're not saying that only women are sexually assaulted, because they aren't. The majority of victims do happen to be female, so I'm not discounting male victims. But it is prevalent sexual violence against women, and sexual, I forgot what I was going to say. Women's rights are disregarded. Women are objectified in the media, in ad campaigns, television shows, commercials. Women continue to be sexually objectified, and people see that as property. And so what happens in rape culture is oftentimes the victim is blamed. So in rape culture, that's where a lot of myths about sexual assault come from. And those myths are, well, it's your fault because of what you were wearing. It's your fault because you were drinking. It's your fault because you went to that person's home or that person's apartment. Or, well, if you hadn't gone to that party. And unfortunately, we've seen that close to home. In Adams County, unfortunately, we see victim blaming and rape culture from a judge who said, well, she was underage. She was at a party without adults. She was drinking, which it puts the onus of the problem on the victim instead of the perpetrator. So that's what rape culture does. It makes people feel less than, or that I deserve this. It's my fault. And that's what rape culture does. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's whenever the trauma of sexual assault happens, that's bad enough, but then the survivors have to worry about all of this that you're mentioning. And so that is a big part of why survivors do not report. And so that's why agencies like Victim Services, and we're hoping all of you viewers who can be allies to survivors and make sure that we talk about this stuff and that we make the world a supportive, welcoming place to eventually, I guess the goal is for sexual assault to be eliminated completely, which may seem like a lofty goal.
It is a lofty goal, but that is our goal. Our goal is to work ourselves out of a job so that we don't have this, that we don't have sexual assault. And the rape culture, if we go back to one of the first questions, is rape culture is also, those are additional reasons why people don't report. So, yeah. But we would like to be out of a job.
Yeah. So Victim Services, the sexual assault program serves a 6-county area. Hancock, Henderson, McDonough, Warren, Knox, and Fulton.
Yes.
So this program, these counties, are mostly rural areas. And many people know each other, especially in smaller communities and villages.
Yes.
Do you think that can make it more difficult for survivors to come forward with everybody being in everyone else's business?
Definitely. So we cover 6 counties, and mostly I work in one of those counties. I do have clients in the other counties as well, but I mostly work out of Fulton County. And if a lot of people know, Fulton County is large in size, but very few in the number of people. And we have very, very small communities. And that definitely causes problems with people disclosing. So imagine that you live in the town of Cuba, Illinois, which is just a little over 1,000 people. Who do you report to? Because you do, and it's pretty much true in a small towns like these, everybody does know everybody. Mm-hmm. So that fear of what happened to you, people in the community finding out, how do you go and report to the local sheriff's department or the local police department when maybe that officer, maybe it's his brother who sexually abused you or mm-hmm. sexually assaulted you? Or when you go to the grocery store, we have a few number of grocery stores. Well, what do you do if you go to that grocery store and the person who assaulted you works there? Mm-hmm. Same thing, and we don't have a lot of hospitals in our 6-county area. But say, let's look at Graham, and I only use that because I live in Fulton County and work a lot in Fulton County. How do you go to the hospital and report a sexual assault when everybody does know everybody? And that fear is there. If I tell this nurse, if I tell this ER clerk, granted, they're not going to tell, they have confidentiality, but that fear is still there.
Right. Because
we are so small that how do I know that someone's not going to see me in the ER and they're not going to tell their brother, their sister, and then, what if I want to go to the grocery store and everybody shops at the same grocery store? That fear of everybody's going to know. Mm-hmm. And in our smaller communities, that definitely plays a part. And also, there's somewhat of a different culture in rural communities. Mm-hmm. In rural communities where we learn early that you work hard and that family takes care of family. Unfortunately, in some areas, there's still that stigma of we don't talk about this outside of the family. Mm-hmm. So you've got that family pressure too, and it's not only in rural communities, but it is there where, we don't talk about this outside of the family. And I think that's more prevalent in our rural communities, that we don't do that. Because who do you report to when everybody knows everybody?
Yeah.
It does increase the difficulty of reporting.
So going off of that, if someone were to call the Victim Services Crisis Hotline mm-hmm. and have that as a very real concern, let's say they're in one of those counties, mm-hmm. Can they speak to the counselor and say, can I meet you at a specific hospital yes. outside of where I live?
So, yes. So there are 2 hospitals in our area that are what we call treatment hospitals that do sexual assault forensic exams and treatment. That's McDonough District here mm-hmm. in Macomb, and then Graham Hospital in Canton. And then there are other hospitals. If someone felt that they didn't want to go to one of those hospitals, people can go to Peoria. So there are other hospitals in the area. And as for meeting people outside of our, some people can't come to my office, whether it's transportation issues and they can't come to our offices, we are able to meet them in other places. Sometimes we can meet clients in churches or libraries or other offices. It's still private, and it's confidential. So we can meet them other places as long as we have confidentiality, so that we don't have to meet them somewhere where they're afraid mm-hmm. that someone's going to notice. And adding to that, just so people understand, in the state of Illinois, whatever is said to a sexual assault counselor stays with that sexual assault counselor. We cannot share that information with anybody. So it is completely confidential. We can't share that with law enforcement. We can't share that information with the criminal justice system. We can't share that information with family, friends, anybody. So it is completely confidential.
Yeah, I think that's really important for people to know, so that they don't have to worry about the gossip mill
right.
Happening, that we're at right. Victim Services and other crisis counselor agencies around the country are very strict about keeping confidentiality. Yes. And so to kind of, we mentioned earlier the consequences that can happen for survivors whenever they are not believed. What are some of the mental and physical ways that a survivor could be impacted whenever they just repeatedly are told it's your fault or I don't believe you?
Yeah. So unfortunately, that does happen. And it doesn't just happen from a law enforcement perspective, but sometimes from a family perspective. And when a victim is not believed, they don't get help. Their lack of trust in the system, in their support system, in their family, no one's going to listen to me, so why even bother saying anything? And when a victim is not able to receive help, or no one believes them, they have a complete lack of trust. And with that lack of trust comes a lot of issues. Victims of sexual assault survivors can deal with PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and that is more common in victims who are unable to report, who don't get help. Slower healing, anxiety, depression, and unfortunately some of the worst statistics of all, victims of sexual violence are 10 times more likely to use illegal or legal substances. Because that's the only way they have to numb the pain, because nobody believed them, nobody will listen, so they think there's no help, so they don't get it. And then also the other one is victims, especially those who are not believed, are also more likely to commit suicide. So not being believed means that victims won't get help. And that, unfortunately, has drastic consequences for our survivors.
So as allies to survivors, what can people do?
The first thing that everybody should do when someone discloses to you that they were either sexually abused as a child or sexually assaulted, the most important thing to do is start by believing. Believe that victim. The statistics are quite clear that the false reporting of sexual assault is incredibly low. It's very, very low. The first and most important thing that you can do is start by believing. Believe that victim. Ask that victim if there's anything you can do, and then provide them a resource, such as Victim Services, our hotline number. But number one is believe.
And just to remind people, what is that hotline number that they can call?
It's 309-837-5555. So, but yeah, believe.
All right. Then my other question is, what you kind of talked about this whenever we first started the presentation, but what services does Victim Services provide to survivors of sexual assault?
So for survivors of sexual assault, we provide counseling, adults, children, irregardless of the age group. So we provide counseling for victims, but we also provide counseling for significant others. We know that the victim has suffered trauma, and we often don't think about the trauma that maybe their family or friends suffer, because they're also going through trauma as well. So we counsel significant others. That can be parents, that can be significant others, that can be friends, but anybody else who's impacted by the trauma of that sexual assault, we counsel as well. We also do public education. We do professional training. We do awareness and outreach in our communities. We teach in the schools. One of my favorite things that I like to do is, that I do outside of counseling, is I do hearts and hands training, which is, we mentioned it briefly earlier, where I go into churches and teach faith leaders about sexual assault. And then I usually have someone do it because it also teaches domestic violence awareness as well. So a lot of public education, private education, but counseling is, by far. We also do legal and medical advocacy, meaning that anytime a sexual assault victim arrives at either Graham Hospital in Canton or McDonough District Hospital in Macomb, that hospital will call us, and we will send an advocate to the hospital who will stay with that victim the entire time during their examination and evidence collection. We answer questions and just provide support. We also do legal advocacy, and that is where we assist victims with getting civil no contact orders, so that the perpetrator has to stay away, cannot contact that victim or communicate with that victim. We offer emotional support in court. We can also offer support when they're speaking with investigators. Now, we may not be in the room when they're being with the investigator, but we're outside so that they know that we are there and offer them support. And in some cases, we can also provide resources. If a client, maybe they're out of groceries. So for some clients, we can provide cards for like Aldi's or Hy-Vee, and those types of things. And emergency shelter for a short basis if needed.
And all those services are free, correct?
Correct. There are no charge for any of our services, whether it's counseling, training, teaching. There are no fees at all. So,
and if someone, because every survivor is different, if they decide to, let's say they start scheduled counseling, and then they decide, I need to take a break, is that okay?
That is okay, and that is common for survivors to do that. So yeah, we do take breaks. I have a couple of clients that have been with our agency for several years, and they'll come to counseling for a while, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to move on. And then maybe a couple years later, they're like, you know what? There's been some stuff going on. Can I? Yep. And they can return to service at any time. And for some victims, it's also kind of what you talked about, is saying it out loud is very difficult, even in a counseling session, in a safe space where it's one-on-one. And that can be difficult. And a client can have a bad session and be like, this is really hard today, and maybe they need a break. And that is okay. We are here for whatever works best for the client, and what their needs are and what their wishes are. That is what we do. So if they need to take a break, that's okay. We'll be here when they're ready to come back.
All right, that's really good to know that survivors have, because often their control has been taken away.
Right.
We give that back
Right.
to them.
Our job is to give them their control back and empower them. So, yeah, empowerment. Yep.
And of course, I think you probably mentioned this, but if the abuse happened a very long time ago, it doesn't matter how long it's been.
Correct.
They can contact us.
Right. It doesn't matter if the assault happened yesterday. It doesn't matter if the assault happened 20, 30 years ago. So, yeah, if they were abused as a child and they're an adult now and they want services, we provide those services. So, yeah, it does not matter when the abuse or the assault occurred.
All right. So we have covered a lot of material. We're approaching the 30-minute mark.
I could talk forever, so, on this topic, I could keep going, but yeah.
Well, you've given a lot of great information, so thank you for being here. And because we did cover a lot of things, if there's one thing that you want people to take away from this, what is it?
It goes back to start by believing. Okay. That is the most important thing. If someone discloses to you, is start by believing. And the other, for victims, the most important thing to know is we are here. You are not alone. There is help out there for you. Irregardless of what happened, when it happened, we will believe you and we can help.
Great. And again, the number you can contact Victim Services at 24/7 is that crisis hotline 309-837-5555. If you happen to be outside of our service area, we will refer you to an agency that covers the county that you live in. So please feel free, friends, family, if you have been affected by sexual assault or domestic violence in any way, to contact that number. And if I had a lot of fun doing this with you today.
Yeah, actually, it wasn't as terrifying as I thought it would be.
Yeah, you did great.
Thanks.
So we'd love to hear if you have any feedback for us about this video. Hopefully we can do some more of these in the future. And actually, we're doing one later today with Alissa. Tune in this afternoon at 2:30. And of course, that recording will also be available on the page for those of you who are watching this in the future. If you like this presentation, it'd really help us out if you like the video or leave a comment on the video. It really helps with the engagement, and it lets us know that you're enjoying and getting help from the content that we're giving you here on our social media pages. If you haven't already, make sure to like our Facebook page so you don't miss videos like this one. We're on there all the time. We're always posting about support for survivors, information like what we've talked about today, all kinds of information. And we do events throughout the year. Again, this April being Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we're doing this, and then October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Right.
So that's another big moment for us for doing outreach. So that's all we have for today. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us, and thank you to Alissa.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for all your wonderful information. If you have any questions, specific questions, call that hotline number. If you have just general questions, you're welcome to type those in the comments, and we will answer those as soon as we can. So thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.